Alright, in this video I want to take a very close and in-depth look at the build quality of the Jasmine JM10 3/4 size guitar. I'm a fan of Jasmine, which makes budget guitars, and I didn't even know that they made a mini guitar until I came across this one for $130. I thought, a Jasmine Mini for $130? This could be a game changer for entry-level guitars, so I bought one. I had already replaced the strings that came with the guitar, so I didn't remove them here. Here I'm loosening them so I can access the fretboard. There was just a ton of shop dust on this guitar and it needed to be thoroughly cleaned and then conditioned. Now that the strings are loose, I just use a soft bristled brush to get most of the dust off the guitar. As I was cleaning it, I noticed that the frets didn't look right. It looked like there were gaps under the edges, like they weren't installed all the way. I bring in the camera to take a closer look, and we can definitely see gaps under the frets. Gaps that should definitely not be there. It's possible that these gaps showed up after the guitar was finished, maybe from the fretboard shrinking. I did find a little bit of evidence that suggests this is exactly how it left the factory though. There is a lot of glue on the frets and the fretboard starting around the 12th fret and going up. If the frets were pressed in all the way and the fretboard shrank, we should see the fretboard with glue, a gap, and then fret wire. Instead, we can see a lot of glue that completely fills some of the gaps between the fretboard and the fret wire. I bet these frets were just poorly installed. I found another surprise while I was looking at the gaps under the frets. Something had hit the guitar really hard on the 17th fret. Whatever it was, put a nice dent in the fretboard and a nick in the fret wire. This definitely happened in the factory because the strings came wrapped in a brown tissue paper that would have had a tear if something hard and sharp had hit it. Leaving that for now, at this point you can still see a bunch of white dust in the pores of the wood of the fretboard. I get the Dunlop No. 65 guitar polish and cleaner to try to remove that. This cleaner works great on minor cleanings, which is what I would characterize this as. I spray some on a microfiber cloth and just keep scrubbing the fretboard until it's nice and clean. In the end, it actually got the fretboard very clean, and there's no shop dust left in the wood pores that I can see. I was really happy to be rid of all that shop dust that came from the factory. And here's a nice close-up look at the fretboard after it's been cleaned. It hasn't been conditioned with oil yet, so the wood sheen looks a little uneven. So it was at this point when I was editing, I did a double take and I had to back it up. Did I just see what I thought I saw? From when I opened the guitar until when I got to this point in editing, I had only seen gaps in the middle part of the frets. Did I just see a gap on the fret end? Yes, on the 7th fret. Before it's installed, fret wire is shaped to a slightly tighter curve than the fretboard radius. This is so the outside edges of the fret wire have a little extra pressure to stay down. A raised fret end can scratch your finger or catch on something like your shirt and then pull out more or even all the way. I wanted to see how big the gap was, and this post-it note, which is about 3/1000ths of an inch thick, didn't have any trouble getting under the end of the fret wire. Okay, back to when I was checking everything out. I wanted to compare two different wood oils, so I used Proline Lemon Oil Fretboard Conditioner on one half of the fretboard and Howard Feed and Wax Wood Polishing Conditioner on the other. In the end, the Feed and Wax was much more evenly conditioned. Maybe the Proline would have been just as good as the Feed and Wax after another application or two. The Proline was very viscous and soaked into the wood, while the Feed and Wax was thick and needed the excess to be wiped off after 20 minutes per the instructions. So I quickly re-cleaned the fretboard with Dunlop No. 65 and then applied Howard Feed and Wax to the entire fretboard. And in case you're wondering, the Proline is made of mineral and castor oil, while the Feed and Wax is made of beeswax and orange oil. I bought the Proline from a guitar center and I bought the Feed and Wax at a Rockler woodworking store. Next, I had to turn my attention to the bridge. Unfortunately, it was sharp and had lots of wood fibers going every which way. It had to have been installed after being cut and shaped, and no one even touched this with sandpaper before sending it out the door, which is a shame. It would have taken about 5 seconds of sanding with some 220 grit to clean it up before installing it. So I had to do something, but I didn't want to accidentally sand the guitar top, nor did I want to go hunting for the sandpaper in my garage. I decided to try and burnish the hard edges with a guitar pick. It mostly worked, but I had to use a utility knife like a scraper to get some of the stubborn fibers off. Then I cleaned and conditioned it, and here's what it looked like in the end. I wish I'd gotten a before close-up to show you because it was bad. With so much going wrong, I wanted to try to make sure I checked everything. I looked at the tuners and, yep, found another issue. One of the tuner's retaining screws is stripped. Not a huge issue, but still, it's not hard to avoid making a mistake like that. Moving on, I noticed that the strap button was poorly aligned. Not a huge deal on a small light guitar, but still, come on. The flat bottom of the button isn't going to sit exactly flush on the 3D heel, but it can certainly be better than this. I wanted to go back and address that nick in the 17th fret before I finished. I have two janky sanding stones that I got from AliExpress. I used the coarse one to get the nick almost all the way out, and then I switched to the fine grit to finish it off. I don't have anything to polish the fret, so it'll have to stay that way. I also checked to see if the frets were even before putting it back together, which for the most part they were. I do want to talk a little bit more about the gaps. First, I'm no luthier, so I rely on videos of luthiers, mainly Stuart McDonald, also known as Stu Mac. Here's what I can gather about fret installation and why this guitar just sickens me. After the fret slots are cut, the fret wire is pre-bent to a curve, which I already talked about, then cut to an oversized length for each fret. The fret tangs on the end have to be cut if the neck and fingerboard have binding, which this guitar does have. Then the fret slots are filled with glue, usually like super glue, and the frets are pressed into place. Then if they need extra persuasion, they'll be tapped with a dead blow hammer until they're fully seated. After that, they'll clip the excess off the edges of the frets. Next, the frets have to be leveled, usually being sanded until they are all a uniform height. After that, the frets need to be reshaped, called crowning, so they don't have flat tops. Then the fret ends are rounded over. Finally, the frets are polished, which helps the frets last longer and strings sound better. As far as I can tell, Jasmine completely skipped at least 3 steps. They didn't fully seat the frets, they didn't crown the frets after they were leveled, and they didn't polish the frets. It's really too bad because the frets are going to need a lot of leveling if they aren't fully seated, and that's exactly what happened here. The parts of the frets that were properly seated only have very small flat spots on top, while those that were barely pressed in have huge scratchy flat tops. Those flat tops will inhibit sound and intonation of the strings they contact and the longevity of the frets. Lastly, and most pickingly, the pick guard is a little misaligned. It'd be awesome if that was the worst thing about this guitar. I'm definitely not going to worry about it considering the other issues we've found. In the end, this guitar looks fantastic, plays really easily, and stays in tune. Those last two are very important aspects when you're looking at picking a guitar for kids to learn on. Like all 3/4 size guitars, it doesn't deliver the tone and volume that a full-size guitar does, but it's normal to trade that away for something that fits well into a kid's hands. I couldn't find a flaw in the finish, which is what I would expect from Jasmine. Overall though, I would have to say I would never buy this guitar again, nor would I recommend it to anyone. It may be okay for the first year or two of a kid's guitar journey, but it's well worth it if you could spend another $30 to get up to the Yamaha JR1, which is a fantastic guitar for kids. At $130, this Jasmine JM10 3/4 size guitar is something to pass on. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that it helps you in your hunt for that first or next guitar. This was the first in-depth review I've ever done, and I made a lot of mistakes. There are a bunch of things that I would like to do differently next time. If you have any suggestions on how I can improve, please let me hear it. We really want to be helpful to everyone out there, but especially those who are looking for guitars for their kids. We have more reviews in the works, so please check back with us later to see those. Until then, this is Mariano Aguirre with Level Up Guitar Lessons saying goodbye.